In 2003, the Dixie Chicks were an incredibly popular country music group. However, when they made some critical comments about President George Bush and his invasion into Iraq, their career took a complete nosedive. Radio stations refused to play their music, fans publicly destroyed their CDs, and as I'll get into, they're arguably the first celebrities to be, quote, canceled by the internet. The Dixie Chicks are a country music group from Texas and came of age in the late 90s and early 2000s. In 1998, their album Wide Open Spaces sold more than 12 million copies worldwide and won Grammy Awards for Best Country Album and Best Country Performance by a duo or group with vocals. The following year, their second album, Fly, sold 10 million copies, and they won the exact same Grammy Awards again. They doubled back. The success continued to spiral, and in 2003, they proudly sang the national anthem at the Super Bowl. They were unquestionably proud Americans, but building within them was an uneasy sense of what the US government was doing. In March 2003, George W. Bush made the decision to invade Iraq, which divided a lot of Americans. He believed that Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, had weapons of mass destruction and also had links to terrorist organizations. Speaking in very broad terms, there were predominantly Republican people in favor of the war and liberal people dead against it, with some conservatives that were against it as well, but those were more of a minority, vocally speaking. The US's war in Iraq was done in conjunction with its allies such as Italy, Australia, Spain, and Poland, but its closest ally in this invasion was the UK. The decision to invade Iraq was equally as divisive an issue in Britain. There was also a lot of anti-American sentiment growing across the world. So when the Dixie Chicks were performing at the Shepherd's Bush Empire in London on March 12th, Natalia Maines, the lead singer of the Dixie Chicks, wanted their British audience to know whose side they were on. As a country music group, people may have speculated that they were in favor of the war, so they needed to nip this in the bud. Maines addressed the crowd and said, "Just so you know, we're on the good side with y'all. We do not want this war, this violence, and we're ashamed that the President of the United States is from Texas." This statement led to an eruption of cheers from the London crowd. Because this happened in 2003, there were no smartphones in the audience to capture it. However, a review of the concert was published in the British newspaper The Guardian. The concert was given 3 stars, and the reviewer spoke positively about these comments. And this is why this was seen as the first, quote, internet cancellation. This music review of a Dixie Chicks concert in London for a British newspaper would never have made its way out of the UK. But because this was now published on a website that anyone could access, this review was being read across the pond and all hell broke loose. A country music website came across the review online and started complaining. There was no social media as of yet, but this would have spread through chat forums online and then gradually into public conversations. Days later, country listeners in the US were calling into radio stations, asking for their music not to be played, and people started publicly destroying their CDs. In Kansas City, a Dixie chicken toss was arranged, where fans were encouraged to dump the group's tapes, CDs, and concert tickets into trash cans. The radio station WDAF-AM's Kansas office received 800 emails from listeners supporting their boycott of the band's music, and 250 listeners called into their Talladega station to complain about the Dixie Chicks. Dale Carter, who worked with the Kansas City station KFKF, said, "The calls came in immediately. Get that off the air. At the time, there were 9 titles of theirs that were testing for gold in our rotation, so it took a large bite out of our library." He went on to say, "We did an auditorium music test right after this happened. We had just started using technology where you've got a room of 100 people and they've got this dial that goes 0 to 100. You could see a song go by and it'd be about 60 to 65, 70 to 80, and a Dixie Chicks hook played and it would literally go to 0. I've never seen anything like that." These radio stations were put in a difficult situation, but at the end of the day, they were running a business, and playing the Dixie Chicks soon became out of the question. Carter explained, "In radio, we're running convenience stores. We're stocking our shelves with what listeners want to hear. It became clear, to this day, that the Dixie Chicks are toxic for my radio station. Absolute no-brainer. If they not only don't want it, but will tune to another radio station if they hear it, why would we play that?" For Mitch Mann, who worked at WIRK in West Palm Beach, things got quite violent. He said, "You'd get calls from very angry people every time you would play a Dixie Chicks song. Reactionary, violent calls, threatening to come down and beat you up. My night guy told me he had a couple of calls like that overnight, and they actually asked a security guard to escort him to his car that morning." The anger didn't necessarily stem from insulting George Bush, but from the people who had family or friends who were serving or had served in the military. The Dixie Chicks were misinterpreted as being against the troops, and this was and is a deeply personal issue for a lot of Americans. The parents of Jessica Lynch, a woman servant in Iraq who had been captured by Iraqi soldiers, were also on TV condemning the Dixie Chicks. Media conglomerates decided to use their power too. Clear Channel, which owned 1,200 radio stations in America and helped to fund Bush's election campaign, banned their music, quote, out of respect for our troops and our listeners. Cumulus Media, the second largest radio conglomerate with 270 stations, followed suit. Sales of their album Home plummeted from 124,000 the week the story broke to 33,000 a week later. Their single Travelin' Soldier instantly dropped from number 1 to number 63 on country sales charts. The Dixie Chicks were put in an uncomfortable situation but decided to stick to their guns. A statement said, "I feel the president is ignoring the opinions of many in the US and alienating the rest of the world. While we support our troops, there's nothing more frightening than the notion of going to war with Iraq and the prospect of all the innocent lives that will be lost." But soon after that, they apologized for the tone of how they, quote, disrespected the US president. The statement said, "As a concerned American citizen, I apologize to President Bush because my remark was disrespectful." Things took a dark turn, however, when the Dixie Chicks started receiving death threats and now required 24-hour security. Emily Robson of the Dixie Chicks had her ranch in Texas vandalized. While all of this is happening, the Dixie Chicks continued with their European tour. Maine said, "We've been overseas for several weeks and have been reading and following the news accounts of our government's position. The anti-American sentiment that has unfolded here is astounding." 4 weeks after the infamous concert, the Dixie Chicks finished their European tour. In response to their criticism, they appeared naked on the cover of Entertainment Weekly with the insults they've received written across them. A popular insult was to refer to them as Saddam's Angels, in reference to the movie Charlie's Angels, which was out at the time. In their interview with US Weekly, Natalia said, "My biggest beef with this, that people have taken my frustration with the president with not supporting the troops. We have nothing but support for them. That is human life. When I saw the rescued soldier Jessica Lynch's parents on TV, it made me really emotional to think they might think we're not happy for them and that we don't support their daughter." In an interview with CBS, Maines was asked about whether she regrets making the comments. She said, "I would still say something, and I would still say something against the war and against everything that was going on, but it would have been very intelligent and well thought out. We like making music and will continue to do that whether people buy it or not." Criticism of the Dixie Chicks ended up going right to the very top. President George Bush was asked about the Dixie Chicks, and he said that they were free to speak their mind, but shouldn't have their feelings hurt just because some people don't want to buy their records when they speak out. He went on to say, "I don't really care what the Dixie Chicks said. I want to do what I think is right for the American people. And if some singers or Hollywood stars feel like speaking out, that's fine. That's the great thing about America." In May of that year, the Dixie Chicks were set to go on their US tour and they sold $49 million worth of tickets on the first day of sale, beating a previous record held by the Rolling Stones. The problem was that these tickets were sold in early March, and before they had made their comments about George Bush. During their first concert in Greenville, South Carolina, Maines addressed the full-capacity crowd and said, "They told me that you may not come, but I knew you'd come. I heard some of you want to boo. That's fine too. We believe in free speech. I'll give you 15 seconds to boo if you want to." Clearly, there was a silent majority that still enjoyed their music, but there was still plenty of anger and resentment towards the Dixie Chicks. One of the strangest incidents was when the American Red Cross turned down a $1 million donation from them, as George Bush was one of their patrons. At a gig in Memphis, the Dixie Chicks performed a cover of Elvis Costello's Peace, Love, and Understanding and showed video footage of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Gandhi. In Atlanta, they received catcalls from the audience, to which Maines responded, "If you're booing, that's okay, because we love freedom of expression, but just remember, we've got your $65. In music circles, the Dixie Chicks received support from Bruce Springsteen and Dolly Parton. Springsteen said, "Right now, we're supposedly fighting to create free speech in Iraq. At the same time that some are trying to intimidate and punish people for using that same freedom here at home. I don't know what happens next, but I do want to add my voice to those who think that the Dixie Chicks are getting a raw deal and an un-American one to boot. I send them my support." But country singer Toby Keith sided with their critics, to the extent that he used a photo of Maines with Saddam Hussein on his tour. The Dixie Chicks hit back by wearing FUTK shirts. During this entire ordeal, the Dixie Chicks found themselves with an unlikely ally. The restriction of their music on the radio was condemned in the US Senate and drew particular criticism from the Republican senator and eventually running for president, John McCain. Louis Dickey, the owner of Cumulus Media, was grilled before the U.S. Senate for boycotting the Dixie Chicks, with McCain saying, "I was as offended as anyone by the statement of the Dixie Chicks, but to restrain their trade because they exercise their right of free speech is remarkable." The Democrat Senator, Barbara Boxer, said, "You've motivated a lot of us to take a look at this consolidation issue. You've hurt yourself in terms of what you want." The Guardian then released more information about the Dixie Chicks concert back in March. Apparently, the American ambassador to the UK was at the concert and even got photos with the Dixie Chicks afterward. As the months went on, a tragic event happened which led Toby Keith to end his ongoing beef with the Dixie Chicks. One of his band members had lost his 2-year-old daughter to cancer and was given an overwhelming sense of perspective. Commenting on the situation, he said, "A few days after I found out she didn't have long to live, I saw a picture on the cover of Country Weekly with a picture of me and Natalie, and it said, 'Fight to the death' or something. It seemed so insignificant. I said, enough is enough." The Dixie Chicks would release another album in 2006 called Taking the Long Way, which included the track Not Ready to Make Nice, which addressed how the past few years had been. It contained the lyrics, "And how in the world can the words that I said send somebody so over the edge that they'd write me a letter saying that I better shut up and sing or my life will be over." The album was #1 on Billboard and #1 on the country music charts. Ironically, they had become even more popular since receiving such vitriol from country music fans, as they were no longer trying to cater to a country music audience and had more artistic freedom. Dixie Chicks member Marty McGuire said, "I'd rather have a smaller following of really cool people who get it, who will grow with us as we grow and are fans for life, than people that have us in their 5-disc changer with Reba McEntire and Toby Keith. We don't want those kind of fans. They limit what you can do." Make sure to subscribe for more.